Thank you. So, we are starting a little late this evening in honor of an astrological timing at this very moment, at this very moment, 7:19.5 p.m. Pacific time, we have a full moon right now, in the sign of Capricorn. We will talk a lot more about this in a little bit. Or a little bit more about this in no, that doesn't work. We will talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. But understand that the full moon happens, happens once every month, and it happens right now as we are opening and as we are talking. And of course, part of astrology is choosing propitious moments to start important events. And yet, I can't take credit for choosing this because it's the first Wednesday of the month here at Soul Food Books in Redmond, Washington. And for those of you who don't know, I am Rick Levine, and we've been doing this now every month we're beginning our 8th year of doing this. I did this for many years, as many of you know, with my astrology partner, Jeff Jower, who has chosen to leave the planet. And so we soldier on without him, and this particular evening is a very special evening because of the full moon. We'll get to that in just a moment. I wanted to spend a minute telling you some upcoming dates. You've probably already been made aware of the fact that I'll be leading a one-week retreat in Bali, September 20th through the 28th. And this is being sponsored by Heaven and Earth Workshops. They do journeys of learning and transformation, and they've been doing this now for 12 years. This will be my 5th retreat in Bali, and this is a very interesting gathering. This workshop will be called an Introduction to the Experience of Astrology, which means that we will be doing experiential astrology, meaning that we will be embodying astrology rather than just talking about it. Whether you're a very beginner or a very advanced or even a professional astrologer, this one-week immersion will be a very fascinating and a memorable experience. We will take care of you from the moment you step off the plane in Denpasar, in Indonesia, to the moment we get you back to the plane 8 days later. A lot of people choose to stay a little bit longer because it's such a magical place. Airfare is still cheap going back and forth to Bali. Right now to Europe is running around $1,200–1,300. You can get a round-trip ticket to Bali right now today for about $920. It's still a lot of money, but cheap compared to some other places. Anyhow, that's end of September. I will also be out at Lilydale, the home of the American Spiritualist Church, the first Wednesday night of August, which means that I will not be here because although I am practicing and getting close to it, I have not mastered by location. So we will do astrology night for the month of August 1 week premature, meaning that it will be on Wednesday night, July 29th. It will be posted both in the calendar of Soul Food Books, Soul Food Coffeehouse, and I will post it also on my webpage and on my Facebook page to make sure that people don't accidentally have to spend a little time here on the wrong night. So, those two things are important, and now we can get on with the show. Most months I stand up here and say, this is the most incredible month ever. Wow, wait till you hear what we have for the month ahead. The month ahead has all this stuff. This month is a vacation. This month it's the first month I've seen in years that has no outer planet activity. And what I mean by that is that when we look at the charts, I thought I had this up here already. Hang on one second. And we do this. Okay, so here we are, and this shows where the planets are now. It says not respect to the horizon. This is with respect to Aries rising. It makes it easier to integrate all the information. Normally, we talk about how the outer planets make aspects with one another because that sets the undertone. That's like the rhythm of the larger rhythm to which everything else conforms. This month, there are no aspects between outer planets to outer planets. What I mean by that is Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all moving around in their own special rhythms, but they're not making any angles with one another. Instead, the noise of the month occurs from the faster moving planets, the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, as they make aspects to the outer planets. Now we always talk about that too, but it's unusual to have that be the song and dance, the show of the month. Now we do have some other things that make this month interesting, and one of them is actually being set up, is occurring today, and I should say right now that when we break in a little less than an hour, we will all, I think it'll be late enough, I think it'll be dark enough, maybe not, I think so. We will walk outside and we will see the conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. Now Venus takes about 3/4 of a year. Well, it turns out to be about a year to go around the zodiac once. But if you think about it, let's just say that I am the sun. Ooh, I like that thought. I am the sun. You guys are on Earth going around the sun. The microphone is Venus going around the sun. So as Venus goes around the sun, it comes between the Earth, you guys are on the Earth, and the sun, just like Mercury does. Just like Mercury, when Venus comes between the Earth and the sun, because you're on the Earth going faster than Venus, and Venus comes closer to the Earth, it looks like Venus is going backwards. Yes, we are coming into much rarer than Mercury's retrograde, a Venus retrograde. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks at a time. Venus goes retrograde 5 times in 8 years. So it's almost every other year. Venus right now is as far away from the sun as it can get. Remember, you're on Earth. Venus, the microphone, I didn't think this out because when I talk, then you don't hear me as well. Anyhow, that's what happens when you make this shit up as you go. So, what happens is that Venus right now has come around from behind the sun, and it's way, 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 way out ahead of the sun right now. Which means that when the sun sets, Venus shows in the night sky as the singular brightest object except for the sun or the moon in the sky. And if over the last month or so you looked up in the sky after sunset and thought, wonder what that is, it looks like an airplane. No, maybe it's a weather balloon. No, maybe it's Superman. No, it's Superwoman. It's Venus. The thing about Venus is that as she gets farther away from the sun from Earth's point of view, remember you're on Earth, Venus is going around, as as Venus goes way out this way, that's when she gets the brightest. When she comes in closer to the sun, she gets eaten up by the brightness and the sun's rays. We can't see her. And what will happen is that in a few months, she'll reappear after... No, right now she's appearing after the sun goes down, and in a few months she'll reappear before the sun rises in the morning. You see, because it's going around the sun, so Venus is always either ahead of the sun or behind the sun. So, what this means is that right now in the sky, Venus is as far away from the sun as she can get from our perspective, which is why she's going to turn retrograde, because she's cycling back around and coming back toward the sun from our perspective. This retrograde actually happens on July 25th, so it's an event this month. Meanwhile, between now and July 25th, Venus will continue to get brighter and brighter and brighter, although she's pretty darn bright already. Add to this mix that every other year, Venus lines up with Jupiter. It's rare, however, that Venus lines up with Jupiter when she's so far away from the sun, which means that they become the brightest things in the night sky, which is what's been happening over the last week. Jupiter and Venus have been getting closer and closer together. Last night, I had the privilege of seeing them just for a few minutes between the clouds out over the Pacific Ocean. I was out near Astoria in Long Beach, Washington. And if you put your thumb out, you could cover the two of them. That's how close they were. Tonight, Venus will be on the other side of Jupiter from where she was yesterday. But again, the sky is so clear that when you look to the west after the sun goes down, and you go about probably maybe about 40 degrees off the horizon, that's where they will be. And they'll unquestionably the brightest things in the sky. You won't go, gee, I wonder if that's them. It's them. So what does this mean? And why is this important for the month, and why is this important for today's full moon? So, in ancient astrology, Venus and Jupiter were considered the benefics, whereas Saturn and Mars were considered the malefics. You see, the Greek astrologers, the ancient astrologers, were very much into value judgments that we modern astrologers try to sidestep. We like to say there aren't good planets and bad planets, there aren't good aspects and bad aspects. There are harder aspects and easier aspects. But just like in the Olympics, if you accomplish a hard drive, you get a hard dive. Hard drive. I had a computer moment. In the Olympics, if you do a very difficult dive, you get extra points just for the level of difficulty. Well, the same is kind of true in astrology. There are planets and there are aspects that are harder to master, but when you master them, you accomplish a tremendous amount more than if you only have easy aspects or easy planets. What this has to do with Venus and Jupiter is that Venus and Jupiter were considered to be easy planets. They were beneficent. They were the benefics. Jupiter, the greater benefic, Venus, the lesser benefic. Just like Saturn was considered the greater malefic. Saturn was a bad news planet in ancient astrology, but Mars wasn't any much better. It was a little bit less bad, but it was the lesser malefic. So, when there is an alignment, a conjunction between these two magnificently wonderful planets, what makes them wonderful? Well, Jupiter is expansion. Jupiter is optimism. Jupiter is bigger and better and more. Jupiter is like a magnifying lens. If you look at Jupiter in your chart, wherever it is in your chart, it's like the cosmos are holding a magnifying lens over that part of your chart, not turning the noise up, but just making it more important. You know, if something seems like it's important, we might reach for it. this creates an opportunity. This creates going on a new journey. Jupiter is the planet of journeys. It's the planet of higher education. Why? Because it's the magnifying lens grows our mind. It expands our thinking. When we go on a long journey or enroll in a PhD program, in biochemical engineering, whatever the hell that is. Either case, Jupiter is involved because it's taking you somewhere far away. So Jupiter is considered to be a really lucky planet. It's considered to be a planet that sets up good news. The word Jupiter is related to the Greek word Jove, jovial. What does jovial mean? It means Jupiterian, jolly, happy, buoyant. All these words are Jupiterian words. Venus, the lesser benefic. Now, I get that she's probably the lesser benefic because size does matter somehow, and Jupiter is huge compared to Venus. But the ancients didn't know that. They knew that Jupiter had a slower rhythm, and they also knew that Jupiter was a male energy and Venus was a female. And I think that that's partly why Venus has been assigned to the position of lesser beneficence. However, last night the two of them were pretty damn close. And all I got to say is Venus was a lot brighter, and she was on top. Take it where you will. I don't want to compare good things like Venus and Jupiter, but they both are harbingers of good news, knowing, of course, that too much of a good thing, like Mae West once said, too much of a good thing is a good thing. Too much of a good thing may not be a good thing. If you drink too much alcohol, if you eat too much sweets, if you eat too much of anything too much becomes toxic. We can't assimilate it. But Jupiter certainly gives us a sense of indulgence, a sense of being full of energy and wanting to take things to the extreme, especially if it's good. Venus, on the other hand, is the planet that's associated with beauty and with love. Can anyone think anything wrong with beauty and love? Yeah, beauty sucks when you don't have it in your life, and love sucks when it goes away, or it doesn't match up with what your warped perception of it might be. The fact is that beauty and love, Venus, are lovely. They're wonderful. Venus is what we're attracted to. Venus is that sense of aesthetic perfection that draws us into something that smells good, tastes good, looks good, feels good, sounds good, is good. That's what Venus is. Venus is the planet of romance. It's the planet of desire, attraction. Venus is like a magnet that pulls us in. Jupiter says it's even better than it looks. What's wrong with a Venus-Jupiter conjunction? That happens today. It happened exactly this morning, but it's been building for weeks, for a week or so. And over the last few days, whatever this good news stuff around Venus and Jupiter have certainly been related to this conjunction. But we need to take a step backwards here and talk about something that I talked about last month without really knowing what was going to happen. How many were here last month? Okay, if you recall, I talked about how toward the end of the month the energy was building, it was getting cool, it was really good. And the goodness, the good stuff that was happening toward the end of the month was that Jupiter and Venus were both forming harmonious trines with Uranus. Now you can see they're still here on the map. I mean, it's still within 1 degree Jupiter being exact, and within a couple of degrees of Venus being exact. Incidentally, for those of you who are watching this on the internet and seeing the screen wobble, it's because it's summer and it's warm here and there's a fan on the screen. I mean, it's not anything mystical happening. It's just the rhythms of the universe. So, Jupiter aligned with an exact trine to Uranus. Uranus is the planet that breaks free from tradition. Uranus is the planet of awakening, of awareness. It's the planet of social change, of revolution, of unorthodox, ingenious, radical, futuristic behavior. Venus made a trine with Uranus just last week. And Venus and Uranus are coming together, Venus and Jupiter are coming together today. This is an event that's been in fulfillment, in culmination for several days now. And it's not surprising that the Supreme Court would nationally, constitutionally legalize a new form of, or a more open form of marriage when the planet of love, Venus, lined up with the planet of bigger, better, more, expand into the cosmos as they were harmonizing with Uranus, the planet that says, I don't give a crap what happened yesterday. This is now. Lightning strikes, new awareness, new ball game. In fact, Mercury, the communicator planet, is also in the mix and will come into the mix even more over the next few days. But there are some things that occur, things often occur in harmony, in resonance with the astrological imagery. But sometimes something happens and you just couldn't make it up that good. Do you understand what I'm saying here? The timing of this is extraordinary. That this event is as major of an event as Roe versus Wade, Brown versus the Board of Education. These big Supreme Court events that have changed the landscape of our culture. One happened this week while this magnificent conjunction was harmonizing with the planet of instantaneous resolution of opposites that normally can't be resolved. You with me?
Oh yeah.
Hello. Pretty awesome week, huh? So, we have this full moon, that the moon at 9 degrees of Capricorn, opposite the sun at 9 degrees of Cancer, kicking the month of July off. It's weird because a full moon is a culmination, and yet the month begins kind of like on this high note. We work 2 weeks to the new moon, and this is one of those months where we actually have a second full moon within the month. This is sometimes referred to as a blue moon by the old Farmer's Almanac. It's irrelevant astrologically. It just means that tonight I have to work a little harder because I have to do 2 full moons instead of 1. The full moon in Capricorn opposite the sun in Cancer is an interesting dilemma because the moon relates to the sign of Cancer and the sun is in Cancer sign and the moon is opposite it. So we're kind of in this dance between Cancerian energy, which I talked a bit about last month, about the crab, about the feeling, about the receptive part of Cancerian energy, emotions, passive-aggressive even, even more so with Mars, the planet of aggression, lined up with the sun. This was exact a few days ago, but they're still close enough that we have fiery feistiness of that Mars energy lined up with the sun, but Mars doesn't necessarily have anywhere to go because in Cancer it's more receptive, it's more feeling. Now this is opposite the moon in Capricorn, which is another dilemma because Capricorn's all about structure and the moon's about change. The moon is about change. And so the moon in Capricorn is not very happy. She doesn't like being in Capricorn because she has to restrain her feelings. She has to hold on to change. She doesn't trust emotions. And so instead, we find that during the full moon in Capricorn, we're working on ambitious projects and climbing up the mountain, but we'd rather be at home hanging out with our family, at the barbecue, at the beach, whatever, because that Cancer crab likes to hang out by the edge of the ocean. So this full moon in Capricorn is basically our dilemma of home, what I like to call home versus career. during the summertime, even if we have a good job, even if we like our job, we don't want to go into the office. We don't want to go to work. We want to go to the swimming pool. We want to go hang out at the beach. We want to chill. We want to chillax, even more than chill. We want to do nothing. And yet that moon in Capricorn doesn't trust that feeling, and so we can't fully relax, and yet we can't just cash in our work. We just can't. We can't fully relax and cash in our work. We have to pay attention to our career, but it doesn't feel comfortable because then we have to restrain our desires, our feelings. Now, the thing that's more significant, or as significant, about this full moon today is that the planet Neptune is harmonized 9 degrees of Pisces to 9 degrees of Capricorn, 9 degrees of watery Pisces to 9 degrees of watery Cancer. Neptune, the dreamer planet, the planet of imagination, of spirituality, is harmonized to this full moon. This is a good night to go home and dream. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, dreams have enormous potential. In some ways, the flip side of that is true also, meaning that this is a time when our dreams actually come into fruition. We can make them real. A combination of the exact Venus-Jupiter conjunction today and the Neptune harmonizing sextile the moon and trining the sun with fiery Mars in the equation, I think is a really propitious sign. Now, what does this mean for the month ahead? In some ways it's odd because this is the culmination. And over the next couple of weeks, as the moon wanes, as we grow closer and closer to the new moon, in a way this energy is lost a bit. But what happens first, as the moon begins to wane, we'll follow it over the next 2 weeks, is that over the next couple of days, Mercury, the communicator planet, who has been stuck in Gemini forever because it turned retrograde last month, it's going direct now. It's heading out of Gemini and actually makes it into Cancer on July 8th. So Mercury is moving pretty quickly now. We'll watch it over the next 8 days, move into Cancer and then eventually catch up with the sun and then eventually get to the other side of the sun. However, right now, Mercury is following up this amazing conjunction and trines to Uranus that's very rare. Not as rare as the thing that's been going around on the internet, though. I don't know how many of you have gotten the thing that said, NASA says this is the first time in 2,000 years that this alignment has happened and it was the Star of Bethlehem.
Yeah, I saw it.
Snope it. Bullshit. It has nothing to do with anything. It's like that same thing that said Mars is coming close to the Earth and will be 40 times brighter than the moon. I mean, come on. Did you see that thing on the internet that it said, don't believe, just because you read it on the internet doesn't mean it's true. It's a quote, Abe Lincoln.
Yep.
All right. So, as Mercury forms first a sextile to Uranus, it hits 20 degrees. Then it hits 21 degrees, forms a sextile on the other side to Jupiter, and then to Venus. And this is occurring over the next couple of days. The sextile to Uranus is on the 2nd, tomorrow. The sextile to Jupiter is on the 3rd. And the sextile to Venus is actually late night, early morning of the 4th, 5th. So what this means is that all of these good feelings that I hope that have fallen into each and every one of your lives at least a little bit, that as Mercury moves through the equation, we get to think it, we get to talk about it, we get to communicate it. It's not quite the same thing as getting the Supreme Court decision as the celebration for those who are personally involved and even those who just are aware of how important this is for history. It's not quite on that level, but with Mercury involved, talking about it becomes important. So over today, tomorrow, the next day, don't be shy about communicating what's going on in your life that is in some way potentially awesome. because by giving it words, by communicating it, by putting the vibration into awareness, that is part of the manifestation process. Hold it in, don't say anything, it'll go by and nothing will happen. There's a bit of a... You ever stand at the ocean and the tide's coming in and a big wave is coming in, but just as the big wave is coming in, on your feet you can feel the sand running out the other direction? There's an undertow, I think is the correct word for that. Well, with all of this yummy, delicious stuff that we have going on, and by the way, I should say here, this isn't over yet, because remember, over the next weeks, Venus is going to turn retrograde, and as she does, on August 4th, that's technically, I'm not allowed under my contract at Soul Foods to talk about it if it's in August. Just kidding. But on August 4th, Venus is going to be lined up with Jupiter again, retrograde. And then in October, a third and final time. So the important thing to understand is when we get these kinds of conjunctions that happen once every 2 or 3, once every couple years, and now they're happening once, then again, all within a few months, it builds the energy. So this is a hugely propitious time to take action, to do things that have to do with expanding Jupiter, Venus, love, and or investments. But I said earlier there was a downside to this, and the downside is that if you blow up a balloon too much, it pops. Too much Jupiter fizzles the energy. And so we have to be careful, we have to pay attention during this time to bring in a bit of Saturn in our mind. Saturn's the planet that holds things back. It's good. These are good transits, or at least they are harbingers of propitious events. It's an auspicious time. However, we can blow it by not practicing any restraint at all. Got it? All right. So, where was I going with this? We're talking about it. I was jumping. Oh, the undertow. All right. So this lovely Venus-Jupiter conjunction isn't over, because it's going to be back with us again in August and back with us again in October. But even though this tide is still building, we have a deeper energy that's pulling in the other direction for the next few days. And what that is the sun moving through Cancer, moving opposite Pluto. Now, we're not talking about this much these days because it's beginning to wane, but we've talked about the Uranus square Pluto that has moved in and out of phase for the last several years. It's now moving further out of phase. It's 6 degrees, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. It's 6 degrees from being exactly square. But today, the full moon is going over Pluto tonight and squaring Uranus, so we may get a little bit of a bump, of a resonance of some of that dynamic change. And here's the key. Over the next few days, the sun, which moves about a degree a day, let's move this a degree a day. There's the sun at 9, almost 10 degrees. There it is at 10, almost 11. 10, what did I do? I moved it a week at a time. Hang on, that won't work. Yeah, wait, just, there we go. Okay, so there it is at 10, almost 11. There it is at 11, almost 12. And you can see how that line between the sun and Pluto is getting thicker. Let me get rid of the moon's lines because they only create noise here. Aspect sets and no moon, and there we go. So as this gets closer and closer, the actual event is 8:30 in the morning, on the morning of July the 6th, that the sun is exactly opposite Pluto. But even that isn't quite the final event, because over the next days, Mars, I'm pointing with my pencil to the screen. This is what brain fatigue is. Okay, so over the next week or so, Mars and Mercury both move into that same opposition point to Pluto, and that's on July 15th. We'll come back to that in a moment because that's the new moon. But do you see how first the sun, and then Mars and Venus, and the moon, which was over here 2 weeks ago, is now over here, and we have this same opposition cooking, and in fact it's also building, these same planets are building to square Uranus. So what does this mean? Pluto is the planet of upheaval that's gradual. Uranus is the planet of sudden change. Pluto is slow motion glacial transformation. It's the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. Pluto is death and regeneration. And that death, not necessarily physical death, it's the space between letting something go and building something new. It's deconstruction and reconstruction. But Pluto often brings up issues of survival and fear of loss or lack of survival, loss of life even, or something important. And so when these planets, beginning on the 6th, when the Sun opposes Pluto over the next few days, it would be wise to look in our lives and see what it is that we are fighting for. What is it that we might fear is being taken away? What isn't working? Who's in our way? Who's resisting us? Who's creating waves that are getting in the way of our forward movement? Because this is all Plutonic stuff. The problem with taking Pluto on head-on is often we lose. Because Pluto often is more powerful than we are. There's kind of like this whole social, it's like if you do something at work and you piss a whole lot of people off. You're not going to fight them and take them all down. Chances are there's a larger wave that's going to come in and roll over you. So with Pluto, we always need to pay attention to the longer look at the change rather than what's happening at that moment. But remember, going back to the Sun opposition to Pluto on the 6th, what will happen is that by the 12th, the Sun will reach 20 degrees. Here's Uranus at 20 degrees. And as the Sun moves to 20 degrees, it will exactly square Uranus. So the power struggle that begins somewhere around the 6th, even now through the 6th, might feel really difficult, but by the 12th, the lightning can strike and something happens, relieving the tension, releasing the tension. This is the rhythm of Pluto to Uranus. However, we still have Mars and Mercury coming into the equation as this undertow continues to develop. And here on the 15th, Mars and Mercury both oppose Pluto. And the new moon is actually that evening. And that whole event is a juxtaposition of the Cancerian need for safety and security and home and family and holding on to, holding things close, staying safe. That's all these planets lined up in Cancer. And yet they're opposite Pluto in Capricorn, and coming in, the moon is actually already squaring Uranus. We can expect dynamic issues on the social front again, that again come back to these same issues that first appeared back in the 60s, have been flaring in and out of the news over the last few years, that have to do with social revolution on the streets, with civil rights, with gender issues, with ecology, with political aggression, with changing of the power structure. These issues that are attributed to Uranus and Pluto as they were in the late 60s and early 70s, and again through the 2010 through 2016, the actual exact squares were 2012 through 2015. The fact is it ain't over yet. And we're going to see through this month, even though there are no exact outer planet activity to outer planets, we're going to see this energy stirred up again this month but this time by the trigger planets, the faster moving planets, the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So that's a lot of what August is about. There's some real noise. Incidentally, the couple days before the new moon, we might go through a little, there's an interesting dance that happens here as Venus, now moving toward the latter degrees of Leo, where Venus and Leo had been lined up. They're still pretty close. You'll still be able to see them in the night sky, but they'll be closer to the horizon night by night because the sun is gaining on them, so that as the sun sets, they get closer and closer to the horizon every evening. Venus is moving toward the end of Leo and actually moves into Virgo, into the next sign, on July 18th. But before she does, she makes a square with Saturn. Saturn that has retrograded back into Scorpio. And when Venus squares Saturn on the, I just had it, on the 13th, Venus squares Saturn. No, that's the, Venus squares Saturn on the 13th, exactly. We might have a day or two of running into either disappointments in love. Venus, Saturn says no. Venus says yummy, nice, sweet, beautiful, money, happiness, riches, sensual enjoyment, pleasure. And Saturn says, not so much. Saturn, though, as Jeff always used to say, Saturn's the planet that says no but means yes. And what he meant by that is that Saturn saying no is not about taking something away from us. It's about giving us the opportunity to have some discipline around the issue so that we can even get more that lasts longer, that endures. Because without Saturn, there's no, things don't have staying power. Saturn is the planet that has longevity and or endurance, stamina even. So this July 13th day, give or take a couple days on either side, we might find ourselves running into some event, something that is either a disappointment or something is taken away from us or we can't, or we want and we realize we're not going to be able to. Whatever it is, it's okay. Because if we fight it, that's when the frustration gets even worse, and that can turn it into a negative ripple. However, the key to working with Saturn is to look at what is the lesson I need to learn, what can I do, what can I make this into, because Saturn really wants to be your friend, but he's a kind of a, he's a hard ass. He's stern. It's like that, that tough teacher that you hated, but you learned the subject really well. So we then come up to the new moon and this incredible, the Mars and Mercury conjunct opposite Pluto. And again, you watch the news. Next month I'll say, next month I'll say, remember when I said July 15th? Well, that's what happened. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know that this is an incredibly propitious new moon, and in some ways, it really gives us each individually a chance to be in touch with our own feelings and see what the relationship is between our inner feelings, the Cancer, opposite Pluto out there, the social conditions in which we live, and to just understand that difference, to work with it, and to know that we don't need to force the caterpillar into being a butterfly today. It's going to happen at its own rate of change. As we move on past the new moon, what happens next is that those planets that were up opposite Pluto come into squaring Uranus, and first it's Mercury. Here on July 18th, Uranus is squared by Mercury, and then on July 25th, Mercury squaring Uranus on the 18th, and then by July 25th, we jump to the July 25th, and now we have Mars in that position squaring Uranus. And again here, I expect to see some noisy things happen on the political front, because Mars is the god of war, assertion, aggression. Uranus is the lightning striking, it's the sudden. Often when we see Mars-Uranus connections, we see sudden releases of anger, hostility, or nationalistic aggression. But the energy has changed here, because even though if there is something that happens on those days, it'll be done under the banner of homeland protection, of security defenses. Why? Because Mars is still in Cancer. The god of war can take over the entire world and do it under the guise of protecting the home. Do you understand what I'm saying? However, something else important has happened over the past couple days that changes the tenor, and we need to back up so that we can talk about the Sun moving into Leo on the 22nd, followed by Mercury right behind it on the 23rd. So Mercury during these days is actually lined up with the Sun, and as Mercury lines up with the Sun, there's this kind of connection between communication, intellect, Mercury, and the Sun, our consciousness, our willpower. So these are very strong days with Mercury and the Sun traveling so close. But what happens is that within a day of each other, they both move from passive, emotional, fearful, controlling, nurturing. Sometimes I have a Cancer moon. I mean, I know both the good and difficult sides of Cancer. And sometimes when we're talking about Cancer, we forget to talk about Cancer as the moon, as the mother, as the nurturer. Cancer is how we're connected to the matrix. It's how we're connected to those who care for us and those we care for. So, as these planets move from feeling, intuitive, caring, responsive Cancer into Leo, we begin a new astrological month. And the new astrological month of Leo sets a very different tone than when the Sun was in Cancer. When the Sun moves into Leo, the Sun is at home. Every planet is related to a sign. Every sign is related to a planet. And the Sun is the planet, we call the Sun a planet in astrology, is the planet that is related to the sign of Leo. Why? Because Leo is a fixed sign. In the midsummer, the Sun is fixed. It shows up the same time, same place, every day. It's relentless. It's bright. It's brilliant. When the Sun shines, we can see what's out there. See, when it's dark, we have to use the moon. We have to use our responsive, our intuition, our feelings. But when the Sun is shining, we don't need our stinking feelings. We can see. That's where we got to go. When we're navigating with a map, we're using the Sun. We see what we're doing. So the Sun is about what's obvious. It's about objective reality. But what happens when the Sun and Mercury together move into Leo, all of a sudden the energy kind of pushes upward and outward, and we want to be on stage. We want to show. We want to make a scene of things. So this is a little bit worrying, or concerning, I guess is the right word. Because as these planets move into Leo, they are at the same time as Mars is kind of angry and not expressing itself. And you know what happens when you don't express anger? What does it turn into?
Depression.
Depression is one thing.
Disease.
Rage is another. Resentment explodes. And so we need to monitor that in our own being, but watch for it in the outer world. So as Mercury and the Sun move into Leo, the energy moves outward. The energy wants to express. We want to express it. Yet Mars, the planet of anger and aggression and assertion, still in Cancer, does a much better job at expressing nurturing and caring than it does anger, and yet Mars, as it squares Uranus, may need to explode. So in our personal lives, it's really important to not wait until the lightning strikes right around July 20th through the 23rd. Instead, keep thinking like, if I was the lightning, what would I do? How would I relieve the tension? Because you see, lightning only occurs when there's no resolution and the positive ions and the negative ions in the atmosphere get stressed more and more and more and more until something has to blow. And we don't want that to happen in our own personal lives or culturally and socially. However, we don't control the military. So we may just watch that unfold however it may during this time. There is a bit of a saving grace going on at first. The question is, how well will we use it? And that is on the days prior to the Sun and Mercury going into, from Cancer into Leo, they each form a harmonious trine with Saturn. And Saturn, remember, is the planet that says no. But with a trine, Saturn has the ability to create structure that we can work with. In a way, a Saturn trine is like settling into a yoga posture again and again and again that builds your strength, as opposed to just going crazy like we Westerners might. And so the Saturn trining the Sun is stabilizing, but we have to work the muscle. That's on July 20th. Then, right behind it, Mercury on the 21st, actually on the 22nd, Mercury forms that same trine to Saturn. And so these are days that we can go out of our way to communicate, to take the initiative in personal communication, in our relationships, because if we do this now and do it with solidity and do it with authority, that's a good Saturn word, and do it with integrity, a good Saturn word, and do it honestly, a good Saturn word, we might just be able to circumnavigate or relieve this pressure so that the lightning doesn't have to strike. As we move along through the month, by the time we get to July 25th, I think things begin to settle down. Oddly enough, though, we're building back toward the second full moon of the month. That's on the last day of the month. Now, I'm going to talk about it just a moment, but remember, next month, we will have Astrology Night on July 29th. So it will be just before this full moon, and I'll talk about it more in depth then. But I just want to say a couple of words about it now, because that full moon will actually be a full moon in Aquarius, and the full moon tonight, now. And by the way, I said this earlier about going out and looking at Venus and Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter are visible, so is Saturn. And as the moon rises here with the trees, it'll probably be 10 o'clock or so, 10 or even 11 o'clock before the moon rises. But when the moon rises, it's going to be a big honking moon. If you can find some place where you're at a lake or at a plains, or open field where you're facing to the east where the sun would rise, that moon is going to rise tonight, and she's going to be big and beautiful. Okay, so the full moon tonight is in Capricorn, and as I said earlier, the Capricorn full moon is a difficult full moon because the moon doesn't get to show her stuff fully. She needs to be official. She needs to be carrying a briefcase and going to meetings. She needs to be ambitious. She needs to be working in the real world, and she can do it, but it's not her in her fullest power. When we get to the moon in Aquarius, it's odd because the moon in Aquarius is even further away from the brightness. It's an odd thing, you see, because the sun in Leo, the sun is in its own sign. The sun loves to be in Leo. But when the moon is in Aquarius, it's as far away from the sun and the sun's sign at the same time that it can get. And so the moon in Aquarius is not nearly as heavy. It's not nearly as difficult as the full moon in Capricorn. And the reason why it's not is because it's broken out of the rules. It's quirky. It doesn't have to follow the rules. It has its own rules. It makes them up. it's unique, it's different. Now there's still a bit of lack of warmth in Aquarius. If you think of it, when the sun is in Aquarius, that's February. That's like the middle of winter. And so when the moon is in Aquarius, we may feel far away from our feelings. However, we don't care. Because we're weird, we're quirky. The moon in Aquarius is deliciously inventive, ingenious, original, and its own thing. It's not so much worried about what the rules are going to say or about what other people say. Now, if you're the proud owner of an Aquarius moon, you may have other things in your chart that still, enforce rules in your life. But the fact is that this new moon. Oh, let me put the moon aspects back in here for just a second. Aspected points, and we go back to there. And this new moon. Let's get it even closer. There, that's close enough. So this new moon in Aquarius is also interesting because she's not connected. It's almost poetic justice when a moon in Aquarius stands alone. Do you remember the farmer in the dell? The cheese stands alone. The moon's the cheese. And it doesn't care if it's stinky cheese. But you see, there's no aspects to the moon. There's no major connections to it except its opposition to the sun. And so that in itself becomes an important statement. And I think what this means is that of the two moons this month, the full moon tonight is way more significant and empowering than this full moon coming up. And it certainly is that for a second reason. And that second reason is my theory. It's based on my theory of the overinflated importance of the present moment. You see, if something happens today, it's always more important than something that's going to happen in 30 days. Even if ultimately, from a longer perspective, even if it turns out that it wasn't that much more important, or maybe it wasn't even important at all, today, it's more important. And so I don't want to get too distracted by this full moon. But other than to say that it's there and that we duly note it. So here's kind of the summary, the thoughts, the feelings for this month, is that a lot of what's going on is what I call local noise. The faster moving planets stir up noise, but the noise that's being stirred up is resonating with some bigger stuff that's been around for a while, and it ain't going away yet. And I think that this month is a key reminder that although the Uranus-Pluto square is done, it's over, it's history, it ain't done, over, or history. And it will remain to see what unfolds this month as we reconvene here on July 29th and talk about just briefly what happened over the month before, because my sense is that we will have clues as to those issues that are not yet done, that are going to hang on, because you see, every 3 months, the sun and the inner planets that cluster around it, Mercury, Venus, and sometimes Mars, every 3 months, that sun will be either, let me back this up, not by an hour here, let me back this up by, I just want to get back to these planets being opposite the moon. That's close enough right there. Okay, so every 3 months, the sun and Mercury and Mars and Venus, which has already come through here, will be either opposite Pluto and square Uranus, or opposite Uranus in 3 months and square Pluto, or on the winter solstice, conjunct Pluto and square Uranus, or next spring, conjunct Uranus and square Pluto. Do you see how this works? Because the 90-degree angle in astrology is where the action occurs. And so for the next year or so, every 3 months we're going to have another refiring of these same events. And August gives us a clue perhaps as to what these events may be over the next couple of years. However, within that, we have this Venus retrograde and this Venus Jupiter, although she's exactly conjunct Jupiter today, this morning. The fact of the matter is that that aspect holds. It will repeat again on August 4th, and then a third and final time in October. No, actually, the third and final time will actually be on August 11th, so that's coming up too. The thing to keep in mind here is that what we focus on, uplifting, the positive, the upbeat now, is even if it wanes over the next few weeks and we feel like, well, maybe it didn't happen or we missed our chance or it's not the way we thought it was, it isn't over. And so throughout this month, when we run into situations that are noisier or more difficult or more stressful, remember that we still have more replays of the Venus-Uranus, and not to lose sight, because it's all about intention, especially as the sun moves into Leo. The energy shifts, and intention, which is one of the key words for Leo, becomes more important than anything else. There we have it. Another month, or as they say, another day, another dollar, another month, another $30, another cup of coffee. Thank you all, and see you next month.